It was one of those peaceful Sunday mornings that make you think tranquility might still exist in our frenzied world. The sunlight was soft, songbirds chattered in the shrubbery, and I was halfway through a dive into my swimming pool, clutching my travel mug filled with premium Colombian coffee like a trophy. My portable speaker softly played Bob Marley tunes. The mingled aroma of pool chemicals and freshly mowed lawn danced in the breeze, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. Then I noticed it. A small crimson flashing indicator on a sleek dark pole just visible above my hedge line, suspended like an electronic insect, positioned deliberately, blinking with scrutiny. Directly above my pool, I halted mid-stroke and squinted, my pulse quickening with each ominous blink. A surveillance device? Someone had mounted a camera overlooking my yard. No, specifically targeting my pool. I observed it long enough to determine this wasn't some neighbor's amateur surveillance setup. It was installed on a metal post situated just beyond my fence, tall enough to peer directly into my personal sanctuary. My coffee suddenly tasted unpleasant in my mouth. Still wet, I strode into my house, wrapped a towel around myself, and powered up my laptop. Within moments, I was searching through the Homeowners Association community portal, and there it was. New security measures authorized, surveillance equipment installed at neighborhood junctions for protection. I resided in a dead-end street. There was no traffic, no intersection, no security risk, just me, my pool, and an obviously voyeuristic HOA. I knew exactly who orchestrated this. Patricia Donnelly, the HOA president who once penalized me for having unauthorized wind chimes. Her grudge was subtle yet relentless. Ever since I skipped her daughter's overpriced, scented candle gathering and dared to install solar panels that clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic, I'd become her primary target in her social calendar. With a towel still clinging damply to my body, I marched to the HOA office, a renovated storage building near the tennis facilities, and found her inside sipping something green and self-satisfied through a metal straw. She didn't even glance up. If this concerns the camera, we've experienced 3 break-ins last year. I crossed my arms. 3? What exactly? Gregory's raccoon scare, Maria's vanished potted plant, and someone sneezing too loudly? Patricia smiled coldly. Community security is everyone's responsibility. That device is aimed directly at my pool. She turned her laptop toward me. Our regulations state that public sightlines must remain unobstructed for security purposes. Your pool simply happens to fall within one. My pool isn't public property. Anything visible from a communal area becomes community relevant. Regulation 42B. It was in that moment, as I stood partially wet in what amounted to a glorified closet being educated about voyeurism disguised as security, that I realized Patricia wasn't merely annoying. She was dangerous in the way bureaucrats with vague, weaponizable rules and just enough authority to make you question your sanity can be. I returned home and dried off, but the anger in my chest remained hot. I examined the HOA regulations. Regulation 42B existed, but was intentionally ambiguous. Public sightlines may not be obstructed from authorized board viewpoints to ensure neighborhood consistency and security. Consistency from a concealed camera directed at my pool. I investigated further. 3 new cameras had been installed, all in public zones. One at the communal mailboxes, reasonable. One monitoring the street exit, acceptable. And the last, a tall, intrusive one positioned behind Patricia's rear fence that conveniently had an unobstructed view of mine. I researched the footage range based on model specifications. With its zoom capabilities and night vision settings, that camera could observe the pool's shallow end, my barbecue area, and indeed through my sliding glass door if I didn't keep the drapes closed. I consulted a friend who practiced law. Technically, it wasn't illegal if the pole stood on HOA-managed territory and the camera didn't explicitly record audio or interiors. It was a nebulous area, a privacy ambiguity planted with Patricia's flag. I could have contacted the HOA board. I could have submitted a grievance, but I knew the outcome. Another meeting, more cold smiles, another dead-end message saying, "We'll look into it." No, this required a different approach. Not a complaint, a declaration. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tented like a villain from a cartoon, and considered my options. I couldn't remove the camera. I couldn't legally obstruct its view permanently. But if Patricia wanted to play games with sightlines, I'd defeat her using her own tactics with vibrant colors, synthetic materials, and absurdity. I phoned my cousin Leonard, an industrial designer who regularly created unusual items like submersible drones and foam armor costumes for conventions. I inquired, "What's the largest, most garish object I can inflate in my backyard without requiring a permit?" Leonard laughed. "You want to block a camera with an inflatable?" "No, I want to obstruct an HOA with the expletive inflatable." He paused. "Count me in." That evening, I sketched designs on a napkin, created a materials list, and searched online for inflatable vinyl barrier suppliers. The solution would be outrageous, magnificent, and completely within regulations as long as I ensured it wasn't permanent. Just temporary decoration, or better yet, event-specific. As I reclined in my chair, visualizing Patricia's expression as a massive tropical-themed inflatable barrier rose between her camera and my pool, I experienced something I hadn't felt since moving into this neighborhood. Authority. Because if the HOA wanted conflict, I was finished being courteous. The following morning, my backyard resembled a warehouse for oversized pool accessories. Rolls of thick inflatable PVC were stacked like burritos near the patio, and Leonard had arrived before dawn, wearing cargo shorts, an energy drink cap, and a smile that suggested, "Let's create chaos." The strategy was straightforward. Construct a 10-foot tall, 25-foot wide inflatable barrier with tropical beach artwork printed on one side and reflective material on the other. The camera would see nothing but cartoon ocean waves and palm trees swaying gently. It would be gaudy, ludicrous, and most importantly, permissible. We began work with Leonard's commercial-grade air compressor and blueprints that looked like they belonged in a science fiction film. I had already applied for a temporary event privacy installation permit under the HOA's own guidelines. There was a provision allowing structures for backyard gatherings and parties, provided they weren't permanent, didn't obstruct community roads, and presented no fire hazard. It passed approval without triggering alarms. Patricia probably assumed I was erecting a gazebo or something equally mundane. Inflation Day commenced with a satisfying roar as the first panel expanded to life. The tropical print unfurled like a banner of rebellion. My dog Maxwell barked at it as if it were a beach monster emerging from the underworld. By mid-morning, the main support column stood tall, secured by sandbags and attached to reinforced anchors in my yard. It appeared glorious and absurd, a plastic fortress of petty vengeance. By noon, the barrier stood fully inflated. A towering wall of artificial paradise completely blocked the camera's field of vision. From inside the yard, you could see nothing but pineapples, flamingos, and dolphins performing acrobatics. From outside, pure obstruction. It was magnificent. I captured a photo, added a filter, and shared it on the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "Privacy is a beach." 3 minutes later, Patricia appeared. She rounded the corner clutching her leash, white-knuckled, dragging her tiny barking dog behind her like an angry fashion accessory. Her mouth opened before she even reached my fence. "What is that?" I smiled from my poolside lounger, drinking a smoothie. "It's decoration for a private pool event. Approved and permitted. Don't worry. I submitted the form under temporary visual installations." She approached the edge of her property, her eyes narrowing at the barrier. "It's obstructing the view of my sunscreen application." I indicated the laminated permit neatly attached to the fence post. "Signed, dated, and witnessed by your secretary during last Thursday's HOA office hours." Patricia stared at it, jaw tightening like a vice. "This is retaliation." "No," I said, raising my voice just enough for the camera above to capture the audio. "This is a beach-themed barrier for personal enjoyment. In accordance with Section 12A, temporary event structures are valid for up to 14 consecutive days." Her lips moved silently, just a breathy, stunned stutter that concluded with a dramatic spin and a retreat march back to her house. I waved goodbye and tossed Maxwell a treat. That evening, I received the first email. "You are in violation of community harmony," it stated, signed by Patricia. "Inflatable installations exceeding 5 feet must be approved by a full board vote for aesthetic disruption potential." Nice attempt, Patricia. That clause only applied to permanent lawn ornaments like flagpoles and water features. I responded with a screenshot of the temporary structure clause and a pineapple emoji. The next morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox, hand-delivered. No postage, no HOA envelope, just a sheet of paper threatening penalties for disrupting airflow across property boundaries. I laughed so hard I nearly tumbled into the pool. I called Leonard, who almost choked on his breakfast burrito. Patricia was clearly grasping now, inventing new justifications to defeat me. She'd underestimated me. For years, I'd been the person who disregarded her fines and kept to himself. But this time, she crossed boundaries. She made it personal. That night, Leonard helped me install lighting strips around the top of the barrier. Soft, color-changing illumination gave the entire structure a warm, festive glow. The camera now faced a twinkling tropical resort every evening, complete with occasional soundtracks of seagulls and ocean waves playing from concealed speakers. By the third day, I noticed something unusual. People were stopping to photograph it. Children pointed. Several neighbors gave me thumbs-up gestures. One even remarked, "Honestly, I'm considering installing one by my hot tub." Patricia must have sensed the momentum shifting. She intensified her efforts. The next HOA newsletter featured a new section called Preserving Community Appearance, a clear reference to my barrier. But even that couldn't prevent what happened next. On the fourth day, as I enjoyed a quiet breakfast near the pool, a man in khaki pants carrying a clipboard arrived. He introduced himself as Richard from the HOA Compliance Committee. "I've been asked to evaluate the barrier," he said, blinking as the inflatable flamingos bobbed beside us in the breeze. I offered him a seat, poured him coffee, and presented the permit. He read it, scratched his head, and admitted, "Technically, everything is compliant. It's obnoxious, but it adheres to regulations." I relaxed. "That's precisely the intention." He chuckled, stood, and said, "You know, you might be starting a trend. We've had 3 people inquire about temporary barriers this week." After he departed, I sat contemplating the irony. Patricia had attempted to shame me into submission. Instead, she accidentally initiated a privacy revolution. It wasn't just about my pool anymore. People were tired of being monitored, penalized, and controlled. The inflatable barrier remained strong, a ridiculous, colorful symbol of resistance, and the conflict was intensifying. 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and was astonished by the sheer quantity of citations stuffed inside. 8 separate envelopes, all stamped with HOA logos and Patricia's elegant but threatening signature. The titles read like a parody of bureaucracy: violation, excessive pool vibration, noise pollution, water splashing, and my personal favorite, inappropriate use of reflective material in a residential setting. It was absurd. My inflatable barrier wasn't merely irritating Patricia anymore. It was unraveling her control over the entire neighborhood. I arranged the citations on my kitchen table like playing cards, deciding whether to laugh or scream. Each carried a fine ranging from $50 to $200, all dated identically. Coincidentally, the same day Richard from the Compliance Committee had visited and confirmed my barrier was completely within regulations. She was retaliating. I knew it. But now she documented it. I acted promptly. I scanned each letter, uploaded them to a shared HOA community forum, and posted, "Received 8 violations today. Anyone else getting affectionate correspondence from the HOA? Asking for a friend." Within an hour, responses flooded in. A neighbor named Sheila posted a photo of her dog's water bowl with a citation for standing water hazard. Another resident down the street, Paul, mentioned he'd been fined for improper shade angle of patio umbrella. The pattern was evident. Patricia was abusing her authority, and I'd exposed the situation. That evening, I reviewed footage from my doorbell camera. Around 5:32 p.m., Patricia herself had approached my mailbox and inserted the citations. That constituted a violation. Tampering with mailboxes was a federal offense. I saved the footage and quietly emailed it to my lawyer friend just in case. But the situation escalated. The following morning, I observed an unfamiliar man walking past my house, photographing my yard with a telephoto lens. Not a neighbor, not a delivery person. He appeared to be gathering evidence. I walked outside, phone recording, and asked, "May I assist you?" The man hesitated, then mumbled something about visual documentation for the board. When I requested identification, he turned and quickly departed. That same afternoon, a new citation appeared on my porch, this time accusing me of ambiance disturbances. Whatever that meant, I anticipated what would follow. Patricia was building a case, accumulating fake infractions to overwhelm me with paperwork until I surrendered and removed the barrier. So I preempted her. I submitted an official privacy violation complaint with the municipal authorities. I included photographs of the camera overlooking my pool, the citations, the video of her at my mailbox, and a detailed chronology of events. The clerk at City Hall raised his eyebrows halfway through reading and advised, "You might want to speak with someone from code enforcement." Indeed, 3 days later, an unmarked sedan parked at my house, and a man with a clipboard emerged. He identified himself as Michael from the City Compliance Division. I offered him iced tea and allowed him to inspect the property. He examined the barrier, measured the distance from the property boundary, assessed the camera angles, and captured several photos. I presented the printed citations. When he reached the one regarding pool vibration, he shook his head and chuckled. "You're not the first," he said. "We've received 3 complaints from this neighborhood this month alone, all connected to the same HOA president. It appears someone's exceeding their authority." "Indeed," I replied. "I've resided here 5 years. Never a single problem until Patricia decided my pool represented a moral threat." Michael completed his inspection and promised to file a report. I could see his thought process. This wasn't merely about one inflatable barrier anymore. It concerned an HOA intoxicated with power and a community beginning to realize it. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening. The barrier was becoming a local attraction. A regional lifestyle blog featured it with the headline, "Backyard Beach Atmosphere Meets HOA Nightmares." Vehicles drove past slower. Children waved. Someone even left a basket of plastic flamingos on my doorstep with a note reading, "Continue fighting the good fight." I couldn't believe it. My petty inflatable revenge had transformed into a neighborhood icon. But Patricia wasn't finished. That night, an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled. I received the invitation via email. Subject, urgent HOA discipline review, resident obstruction case. Classic Patricia. The meeting was arranged for the following evening in the community clubhouse. I arrived wearing a Hawaiian shirt, carrying a binder containing printed bylaws, city permits, and a USB drive with video evidence. The atmosphere was tense. Patricia sat at the front of the table, surrounded by other board members, most of whom appeared uncomfortable. She began a speech about decorum, visual stability, and how the barrier had divided the community emotionally and physically. I allowed her to finish, then calmly opened my binder and responded. "This barrier is temporary, approved, within regulations, and harming nobody," I stated. "But the camera you installed above my property without consent, that's a privacy violation. The fraudulent citations, retaliation, and the mailbox incident, that's federal." Silence descended. I distributed copies of the legal complaint I'd filed with the city, along with the footage of Patricia at my mailbox. One board member, an older gentleman named William, leaned over and whispered something to the woman beside him. She nodded. Then William spoke. "Patricia, did you actually deliver those citations personally?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "Well, someone had to ensure he received them." "But that's not procedure," William said. "That's not your responsibility." Patricia stammered. "You're all missing the fundamental issue. This is about control, about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood." "Perhaps the neighborhood desires less integrity and more flamingos," I remarked. Laughter erupted around the room. Even William smiled. Patricia stood, grabbed her binder, and stormed out without another word. That night, I received an email from a board member named Priya. She thanked me for speaking up and mentioned several people had requested a vote for new HOA leadership. The conflict had accomplished more than blocking a camera. It had exposed a system everyone detested, but had been too intimidated to challenge. The battle wasn't resolved yet, but the tide had begun to shift. And for the first time since that camera activated, I felt like I wasn't merely struggling against the current. I was creating a wave. By the time the HOA fallout reached day 10, My inflatable barrier had evolved well beyond its original purpose. What began as a beach-themed blockade was now a fully weaponized statement. I added motion-activated lights along the upper edge that illuminated with cheerful LED messages whenever movement was detected near the camera pole. Smile, Patricia was particularly popular. Speakers hidden behind potted palms occasionally played ocean sounds, Caribbean music, or recorded seagull calls. Yes, calls. It wasn't just a barrier anymore. It was an experience. But beneath the humor, dynamics were changing. The neighborhood had started choosing sides. Some quietly supported me, slipping anonymous notes under my door, like, Patricia had it coming, or your barrier gives me hope. Others remained silent, cautious about attracting attention. And then there were Patricia's supporters, 3 or 4 tight-lipped homeowners who echoed her outrage in lawn whispers and sideways glances. It was no longer about privacy or inflatable barriers. It had become political. I'd underestimated how far Patricia would go when cornered. On day 11, a new sign appeared near the community entrance. Professionally printed, HOA branded, reminder, all yard modifications must be pre-approved. Excessive decoration may result in penalties. I photographed it and posted to the neighborhood forum captioned, "Blink twice if Patricia's holding your taste hostage." The post went viral, 35 comments within an hour. Some expressed anger, others sarcasm. One neighbor wrote, "If Patricia despises color so intensely, someone should gift her a crayon set in therapy sessions." Pressure was mounting, evident in her expression during our next encounter. She didn't yell. She didn't even speak. She just observed the barrier, lips thin, fists clenched, her small, yappy dog jumping at the leash's end as if sensing her rage. I should have anticipated what followed, but even I wasn't prepared for the complete meltdown that ensued. The HOA scheduled another meeting, this time public, with an invitation including one ominous line: community vote on policy update proposals and special action motions. I arrived early, seated myself near the back, and immediately noticed something different. The mood had shifted. People whispered, but not nervously. There was anticipation. Cameras were ready. Phones were charged. Even Sheila, who received the dog bowl citation, brought a folding chair and popcorn. Patricia stood at the front with a massive binder labeled Visual Safety and Community Order. She presented a PowerPoint that would impress a dictator. Slide after slide displayed blurry images of my barrier, screenshots from the HOA group chat, and even a brief clip of my inflatable flamingo bouncing in the breeze, described as potential wind hazards. She warned of legal exposure, insurance liability, and neighborhood moral decline. Then she proposed a new policy. All temporary installations exceeding 6 feet must undergo board review and be removed upon request by any board member. Murmurs spread. Someone coughed, ridiculous, rather loudly. Patricia raised her hand like a teacher demanding silence. Then she revealed her surprise strategy. A letter from a supposed neighborhood safety consultant warning that the barrier could obstruct community watch visibility and potentially impede emergency response. I rose slowly, waited for her to conclude, and approached the front. "Let's be clear," I said, addressing everyone. "This isn't about safety. This isn't about aesthetics. This is about control. You want to remove a legally permitted inflatable structure because it blocks a camera you installed without informing me, directed at my private pool, and you've issued fraudulent citations to silence me. That's not policy. That's harassment." Patricia attempted to interrupt, but the murmurs had transformed into applause. I continued. "This barrier isn't a threat. It's a mirror, and people are finally recognizing what's been happening here for years." William, the soft-spoken board member, raised his hand. "Can we vote to postpone this ridiculous policy amendment?" Priya, another member, nodded in agreement. A formal vote commenced. The amendment was rejected. Patricia's complexion paled, and for the first time since this conflict began, she remained silent. She simply stood there, jaw tight, binder trembling slightly in her hands. I thought that would conclude the matter. But Patricia, like any antagonist with delusions of grandeur, had one final maneuver. That night I received an envelope via courier. Inside was a printed copy of a restraining order request filed in her name, alleging I'd harassed her publicly, caused emotional distress, and created a threatening environment with the barrier. I examined the documents, partly disbelieving, partly impressed. She'd escalated dramatically. She lacked legal grounds but intended to publicly humiliate me. I scanned the documents, forwarded them to my lawyer friend, and waited. The response came quickly. A week later, I found myself in court. Patricia sat on one side, dressed entirely in black, as if auditioning for a legal drama. I sat opposite, holding a manila folder containing screenshots, video evidence, HOA emails, and a printed copy of the city's compliance report, clearing me of all violations. The judge listened patiently. Patricia attempted to portray herself as the victim, describing how the barrier dominated her mornings and caused her dog unnecessary anxiety. When my turn came, I kept it simple. The timeline, the fraudulent citations, the mailbox footage, the city approval, and the community support. The judge dismissed her request with a single statement. There is no foundation here, and frankly, this appears retaliatory. She avoided looking at me as she exited the courtroom. When I returned home, a note was attached to my door. No signature, just one sentence. Thank you for standing up when we couldn't. I inhaled deeply and gazed at the barrier. Still standing, still outrageous, but no longer just mine. It had become a symbol of something much greater, and it wasn't being dismantled anytime soon. A week after Patricia's courtroom defeat, the neighborhood atmosphere had changed, becoming lighter. Somehow, people greeted each other more frequently. Conversations occurred on sidewalks rather than behind hedges. Even the HOA bulletin board outside the clubhouse had lost its typical stern appearance, now covered with hand-drawn flyers for a flamingo celebration and a homemade petition demanding more enjoyment, fewer penalties. Patricia had withdrawn into her residence like a defeated general, blinds drawn, her dog's sharp bark now the only indication she still resided among us. The cameras remained, but the one facing my pool disappeared, quietly removed 2 days after the judge's dismissal, likely during nighttime hours. I believe that concluded the matter. I'd triumphed. The barrier stood proudly. The neighborhood was rallying, and Patricia's influence had fractured. But what I never expected, what nobody anticipated, was the insurrection. Initially, it began with whispers. Priya, the board member who supported me during meetings, contacted me and asked if I'd discuss strategy. Strategy for what? She informed me the board was meeting privately without Patricia. William had proposed an emergency vote to dissolve the current leadership. Too many grievances, too many controversies, too much embarrassment. The visual safety campaign had destroyed public perception, and the restraining order attempt. That was the decisive factor. The vote was scheduled for Friday evening, a quiet coup in a fluorescent illuminated community center. I didn't attend. I remained home, prepared hamburgers, and floated in the pool with Maxwell nearby, watching the inflatable barrier ripple in the evening breeze. Around 9 p.m., Priya texted 2 words. It passed. The following day, Patricia's resignation letter appeared on the HOA forum. It was predictably dramatic, extensive, citing irreparable community disobedience and flagrant celebration of disorder. She blamed the barrier, the court, the board, the neighbors, even certain aquatic-themed inflatables that fostered a carnival-like environment. But it was irrelevant. She was removed, effective immediately. Priya was elected as the new HOA president. Her first official act, a community survey asking which regulations needed elimination, revision, or complete abandonment. The second, an open invitation to my backyard for what she called the Great Decompression Pool Party. On the day of the celebration, I woke early and walked around the barrier. It had fulfilled its purpose and more. Now it stood less as protest and more as monument. Still outrageous, still oversized, but beloved. I contemplated deflating it, storing it away, restoring the clean sight lines Patricia always desired. But as I observed the first neighbors arriving with folding chairs and coolers, I realized something. The barrier wasn't solely mine anymore. By midday, the backyard was crowded. Children splashed in the pool. Sheila brought flamingo-shaped cupcakes. William arrived wearing cargo shorts with a portable speaker playing 1970s rock music. Even Paul, who received the umbrella citation, distributed custom-printed beverage holders that read, "Liberate the lawn." There was laughter, music, and something I hadn't witnessed in this neighborhood for years, people genuinely enjoying each other's company. During the party, Priya took the microphone. "Let's celebrate Jake," she said, raising a glass of lemonade, "for reminding us that being neighbors doesn't mean being prisoners." The crowd erupted in cheers. I nodded, embarrassed yet proud. Maxwell barked as if accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award on my behalf. And then came the final twist. A tall, businesslike woman wearing dark sunglasses and a tailored pantsuit stepped forward from the crowd. She introduced herself as Leslie from the City Zoning and Residential Oversight Department. She'd reviewed the camera complaint, followed the situation, and decided to make an unannounced visit to observe the ongoing neighborhood dynamics. Everyone fell silent. She looked at me. "You filed the initial privacy complaint, correct?" I nodded cautiously. "Yes, didn't expect it would make me a party host." She displayed the faintest smile. "Well, you've certainly created a case study in nonviolent resistance. I came to determine if further policy revision was needed regarding HOA surveillance of private property." She paused, turning toward the barrier. "That inflatable structure is absurd and brilliant." The tension dissolved into laughter. She remained for an hour, conversed with neighbors, accepted a plate of refreshments, and promised her office would issue updated guidelines on camera placement to prevent future overreach by enthusiastic HOA officials. It wasn't merely a victory, it was the beginning of reform. As the sun descended below the rooftops, casting a warm glow over the pool and the dancing shadows of inflatable flamingos, I relaxed with a cold beverage, watching neighbors toast to freedom, dance barefoot on the grass, and share stories as if they'd known each other forever. It felt like a reset, as if the neighborhood had restarted, minus the control, minus the fear, minus Patricia. The next morning I deflated the barrier, not because I was required to, but because I wanted to, because its mission was accomplished. I left one flamingo standing, firmly planted in the lawn near the mailbox with a small sign around its neck reading, "Patricia Free Zone." And just like that, the pool was accessible again, not just to water and sunshine, but to life, to laughter, to a community finally free to be authentic. All thanks to one ridiculous barrier, a blinking red camera, and a neighbor who decided enough was enough. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to share it with friends who've dealt with overzealous HOAs or anyone who appreciates standing up to petty tyranny in creative ways.